This week, in wrestling history, we go back 116 years ago this week. By far, the earliest that we've gone back in one of these segments. At Madison Square Garden in New York City, George Hackenschmidt beat Tom Jenkins in 2 straight falls to become the World Catch-as-Catch-Can Heavyweight Champion, which really was the first recognized world championship in wrestling in this country. This is from an article that appeared the next day in the New York Times. George Hackenschmidt, by his great strength, defeated Tom Jenkins last night for the World's Championship at Catch-as-Catch-Can Wrestling. At no period during the match, held in the Madison Square Garden, was the American anywhere near securing a fall from the vaunted Russian Lion. Whenever you would hear people say, like in WCW, that the world title traces its roots back to 1905. We used to hear that sometimes. Tony Schiavone would mention it on commentary. It's this match that they are referring to, even though it is greatly stretching the truth to insinuate there being any sort of real lineage between the title that Hackenschmidt won and any modern-day title, including the Big Gold World Heavyweight title. Basically, there is none. There is no connection. 37 years ago this week, on May 6th, 1984, World Class Championship Wrestling presented the David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions as a tribute to the 25-year-old who died 3 months earlier while on tour with All Japan. David was the one. He was the chosen one. He was the one being groomed to become the NWA World Champion. His father, Fritz, wanted his son to follow in his footsteps. And after David died, Fritz supposedly went to the NWA's Board of Governors and all but pleaded with them to have Ric Flair drop the title to one of his surviving sons instead. They agreed, and the decision was made to put the title on Kerry, who did not have the experience of his older brother Kevin, but he looked the part and he was over with the fans, and so they decided to go with him. And he also was not very reliable, given some of his vices at the time, which is at least part of the reason why he did not hold on to the championship for very long. On this day, before 32,000 fans at Texas Stadium, Kerry pinned Ric Flair with a backslide to become the NWA champion, but he would only hold the title for 18 days. 18 days later, he would drop the belt back to Flair in Japan. He basically got it as a way for the NWA to placate his father, tell this great story of him winning the championship in honor of his late brother. But he would never hold the title again. None of the Von Erich boys would hold the championship ever again. Not that there were many of them left, sadly. 32 years ago this week, on May 7th, 1989, the NWA held its Wrestle War Music City Showdown pay-per-view in Nashville, with Ric Flair pinning Ricky Steamboat in the third and final match of their classic trilogy that year to regain the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. Judges at ringside to determine the winner, had it gone the full 1-hour time limit, were Terry Funk, Pat O'Connor, and Lou Thesz, all former NWA champions themselves. After the match, Funk attacked Flair after Flair had turned down his request for a title match, and he gave him a pile driver onto a table at ringside. This was voted Match of the Year in 1989 by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, but, with Flair in 89, you pretty much had your pick of the litter. I mean, you could have voted for any of the first 2 matches with Steamboat, or his I Quit match with Funk at New York Knockout later that year. In a week where Will Ospreay beat Shingo Takagi in a fantastic IWGP title match at the New Japan Pro Wrestling Dontaku event, we go back 28 years ago to May 3rd, 1993, the date of the very first Wrestling Dontaku show at the Fukuoka Dome before 55,000 fans. This is back when New Japan had working relationships with both WWE and WCW. Brutus Beefcake beat Masa Saito. Sting wrestled Scott Norton to a double DQ. And in what was billed as a dream match, Hulk Hogan the reigning WWE champion, beat the Great Muta, the reigning IWGP heavyweight champion. Neither championship was on the line. Hogan had his working boots on for this one. He knew what worked in the States and what worked in Japan were two totally different things. Here you saw Hogan doing actual wrestling holds. It was quite jarring to see. And it's also something I mention to people if they ever bring up the fact that, oh, Hogan couldn't work. Hogan couldn't wrestle. No, Hogan could work. If Hogan wanted to work, if he was motivated to work a certain way, depending on where he was and what country he was in, he could work. That is not a valid criticism. Hogan tried to use a chair late in the match. He shoved the referee down when he tried to take it away from him. And when he turned around, Muta misted him, mostly in the chest, not so much in the face. Hogan dropped the big leg, but Muta kicked out. He hit a big boot and his big clothesline finish, which he had used in Japan for years. Back in the early 80s, the Axe Bomber for the win. The drama came before and after the match with Hogan's promos. So prior to the match, in fact, I think it was the morning of the match, Hogan was doing an interview, and he said that he was the WWE champion, or the WWF champion. But what he really wanted to do was end his career back in Japan, where he had first wrestled years earlier. And in fact, it's worth noting that Hogan was the very first IWGP champion. He won the earliest version of that title back in 1983. He said the IWGP belt was the most important belt in the world today. Now, he said this while having the Winged Eagle belt draped over his shoulder. And then he said that the WWF title was just a stepping stone, and that he wants the IWGP belt. Fast forward later on, after his win over Muta, in the post-match media session, he's sitting at the dais. Jimmy Hart is with him. He's trying to sit the WWF belt on the table without it falling down. And Hogan is talking to the media, and he's pointing at the belt, and he calls it a toy. He calls it a trinket. Like an ornament on a Christmas tree, he says. He says the belt that he wants is the one with the Great Muta, the one that Muta has, because he wants all of the great wrestlers to come to him. He wants them to come to Japan where he can wrestle and not bullshit. I want to wrestle and prove that I'm the best. As you would imagine, this did not go over very well back in the States, although Hogan, back then it would be rare for anyone to go over on Hogan. But people in WWE were not very happy about him burying their championship, which is what he did. He buried the belt. Hogan claimed he was either misquoted or his comments were taken out of context, I forget which might have worked if there was an actual video footage of him speaking those exact words on camera in plain English. 2 days later, at Kawasaki Stadium in Japan, FMW hosted its 4th anniversary show with an explosive main event. Literally. It was the Atsushi Onita against Terry Funk match that is talked about by a lot of people to this very day. The very first no ropes barbed wire time bomb death match. So they'd already done no ropes barbed wire matches before, but never a match where the ring would explode at the very end. The event was a huge success off the back of that match. They drew 41,000 people, 32,000 of those paid, for a $1.8 million gate. The referee, it's just comical. The referee was wearing what can only be best described as it may have been an actual beekeeper's outfit, for all I know. Because this guy wasn't taking any chances, okay? When the referee is wearing protective padding, you know some shit's about to go down. But this was a case of the teacher and the student. Funk had trained Onita in Amarillo years earlier. Each time one of them touched the barbed wire, there would be a small explosion. After 10 minutes, there was a 5-minute countdown clock before the ring would supposedly blow up. Onita won the match with a DDT with about 2.5 minutes left before the big kaboom. and there was a loud air raid siren playing as time ticked away. Onita exited the ring with about 20 seconds left. Then he realized how little time was left. And he looked back and he saw Terry Funk, his teacher, his mentor in many ways, laying there in the ring. And ever the heroic babyface, Onita scurried back inside. He started smacking him in the face. He's trying to wake him up. He's trying to drag him out of the ring. But with 3 seconds left, he realizes there's no time. He lays on top of Funk to protect him as explosions went off around the ring. Funk's nose was all cut out from the barbed wire. Onita needed 72 stitches in his back and his stomach when it was over. This was the inspiration for the Jon Moxley-Kenny Omega match that we got earlier this year at Revolution. The final explosion here was, better than the sparklers that we got on the AEW show, but not by much. This was the first time anybody had ever tried something like this, though, so you leave some margin for error, I guess. It was the emotion of the match and the epic selling by Terry Funk, his facial expressions, the way he sold pain every time he would hit the barbed wire. That's really what makes this match stand out as a classic. Onita actually announced this week that FMW is coming back as FMWE, the E standing for Explosion. It is now in the name of the promotion. They're holding their first show on July 4th at some fruit and vegetable market in Japan. Come buy a mango and stay for the explosions. But apparently that's going to be the new draw, or the draw of this new promotion, is that every main event or every big main event is going to be an exploding barbed wire deathmatch. 27 years ago on May 7th, 1994, we go back to Japan, this time for a WWE show in Yokohama that saw WWE champion Bret the Hitman Hart not only kick out of a Randy Savage elbow, but submit the Macho Man with the sharpshooter in the main event. It's too bad we never got that match at a pay-per-view here in the States. 2 days later, in Osaka, featured an 18-man Royal Rumble match, which was a 45-minute affair that ended with The Undertaker eliminating Bam Bam Bigelow for the win. Undertaker was still off WWF television during this time. He would not reappear until SummerSlam, the real Undertaker, not the imposter one. Earlier on the card, Undertaker beat Jinsei Shinzaki in a one-on-one match, who would join the company the following year as Hakushi. This was one of 3 Royal Rumble matches that WWE did in '94. There was also one at Madison Square Garden in January, less than a week before the pay-per-view version, which Owen Hart won. That went. It was a long match. It went about an hour and 10 minutes with Owen going over. I know there is, or at least there used to be, fan cam footage of that one available online. I'm sure if you search around for it, it's still probably floating around somewhere. 23 years ago this week, on May 3rd, 1998, at a WWE live event in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, Edge and Christian had their first singles match against one another in the company, but not as Edge and Christian. Instead, it was as Adam Copeland and Christian Cage, and it was a win for Edge. This was Christian's very first WWE match. Edge had put in a good word for him and got him invited to Dory Funk Jr.'s Funking Conservatory training camp that year, which at the time had an affiliation with WWE. And from there, he got signed to a contract. He didn't make his television debut until September at the Breakdown In Your House pay-per-view. Edge made his in-ring television debut about 7 weeks after this match against Jose Estrada of Los Boricuas, in a match where Edge landed on Estrada's, on his head, really, on a suicide senton out over the top rope. And he broke Estrada's neck in the process. Edge's leg came right down on top of Estrada's head. It's kind of weird how his career began with a broken neck and ended 10 years ago with a broken neck of his own. But now he's back. Estrada did wrestle again, but not for WWE, and he never really did much after that. On that very same night, in '98, ECW hosted Wrestlepalooza on pay-per-view, the only Wrestlepalooza of the 4 they ever did to air on pay-per-view, emanating from Marietta, Georgia, and it was not a great show. Rob Van Dam fought Sabu to a 30-minute time limit draw for the television title, and Shane Douglas retained his ECW World Heavyweight title in the main event over Al Snow. Douglas suffered an injury. He was out of action for a few months after this, which is why Taz was given an old TV title that he branded the FTW title to defend until Douglas was ready to come back. Brian Cage now holds that FTW title in AEW. This was also Al Snow's final ECW match before returning to WWE, who had sent him to ECW after the new rocker stuff that he was doing with Marty Jannetty didn't exactly light the world on fire, but they knew there was something there. They liked the guy. They knew he had talent. They just needed him to just find himself and just find a way to bring that personality out of him. And they thought Heyman might be just the person to try to do that. So they had something of a secret little working relationship at the time with ECW, and he wound up going there. And what ended up happening was he got over. Wouldn't you know? He started doing the head gimmick, and the moment the WWE saw how over he was, they called him back up. During the show, Joey Styles introduced a celebration of Georgia legends. Among them were Dirty Dick Slater, Bullet Bob Armstrong, the Masked Superstar, Bill Eadie, a.k.a. Demolition Axe, and the Junkyard Dog, who was once a massive star for Bill Watts in the Mid-South territory. In fact, that was his most prosperous period in wrestling. Even more than the stuff he did in WWE. Junkyard Dog was a huge star. Made a lot of money in Mid-South. And then he went to WWE, and his weight got the better of him, and he was never the same performer ever again. He was the most over star of the bunch here when he was introduced. Loud chants of JYD. But there is a funny story behind this. There was a physical confrontation, an altercation, if you will, in the back before he came out with New Jack. And as New Jack tells the story to Sean Oliver, he had sold some weed to Now, you know when a story starts like that, it's going down a bad road. When you're talking about New Jack here and a deal gone sideways, but he had sold some weed to JYD sometime before. I mean, it may have been months before this. And he never got paid. And later on, there was some kind of barbecue at another wrestler's house, and he found out that somebody had Junkyard Dog on the phone. He goes, "Give me the phone. I want to talk to him." He gets on the phone with him, and he says, "You owe me $300 for the weed that I got you." And he claims that Junkyard Dog told him that he wasn't going to pay him anything. And New Jack is not the kind of person that you want to owe money to. He's like, "Motherfucker, I'm going to get my money." So now fast forward to this show. And New Jack finds out that JYD is going to be there. And Paul Heyman finds out about this beef. And he desperately does not want him to do anything to ruin the show. And he tells New Jack, "Look, I'll pay you myself. I'll pay you for the weed. How much does he owe you?" And New Jack says $300. And Heyman says, "I'll cut you a check myself for the $300. Now, if Paul Heyman promises to cut you a check, that's enough reason, at least back then, that's enough reason to say no. But New Jack says no because you don't owe me the money. He wants Dog to pay him because he's the one who owes him the money, not Paul Heyman. He goes, "He's going to pay me my $300. So he sees Junkyard Dog backstage, and there are differing stories about whether or not JYD was bragging about the fact that I'm not going to pay this guy. Oh, you didn't think I was going to show up, did you? I don't know who said what, but New Jack says he was wearing a pinky ring, and he slugged JYD with it right in the face. He cut him. He said he cut him right under Dog's eye. He was bleeding all over his shirt, and he had to change shirts before he came out to the ring for the big ceremony here. In fact, if you go back and watch it, and miraculously Peacock has it up right now, JYD is introduced wearing an ECFNW t-shirt, which they had to give him. I'm sure they gave it to him to replace his own bloody shirt. I mean, if what New Jack is saying is true, it would make sense. If he had blood all over his shirt, he took the shirt off. ECW, gave him one of their own shirts. He was the only legend they brought out who was wearing an ECW shirt. And his eye looks fine, but he's got what looks like a piece of, I don't know, tissue or toilet paper or something right next to his mouth, like right by his lip. And it's got a little bit of blood on it. It's almost like if you cut yourself while you're shaving. That's what it looked like. And it was only a month later, JYD was driving home from his daughter's high school graduation when they believe he fell asleep at the wheel and he rolled his car 3 times and died. New Jack is still upset that he never got his $300. That he died before he could get it.